Welcome to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, where there's always another secret.
In a world where the world is small and covered by ocean, the Koreans have taken over the entire planet, and chalk is magic. Welcome to episode 83 of the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies. Today's May 10th, 2021. I'm Bill, and I am joined, as always, by my very noble and majestic co-hosts, Amy and Jordan. Welcome, guys. How are y'all doing?
Good. If you told me that, I would have worn my crown. But, you know, it's okay. Just know it's in the other room.
I came prepared, frankly, to be noble and majestic, and got my unicorn with me. And for those of you who are audio only, this is very confusing. And if you want to know why I have a unicorn, a very expressive stuffed unicorn,
Larry the Purple Unicorn.
You'll have to come by my stream sometime.
I have a toy horse, but that's not a unicorn, sorry.
Before we get started, we do want to remind you that the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies is not a spoiler-free podcast. Normally that means there'll be plenty of Cosmere spoilers, but tonight those should be pretty light, since we're taking a little detour to discuss one of Brandon's non-Cosmere books. Tonight we are talking about The Rithmatist, formerly known as Scribbler. For those of you who listen to the podcast recordings or watch the videos on YouTube, we do want to remind you that it's possible for listeners to interact with us live via chat as we record each episode at www.twitch.tv/InKeepersTable. We record episodes of the podcast every other Monday night, starting at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, so please join us and take an active part of the discussion. The Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies is made possible by the support of our listeners and patrons. The show will, of course, continue to be free, but if you want to help us out, head on over to patreon.com/Cosmere Studies. Even pledging $1 or $2 per episode really helps us out as we work to improve the show. Patrons get immediate access to our Discord channel where you can talk about the show, the Cosmere and non-Cosmere books as well, with other listeners. It's a great community. We've got great discussions. You get early access to bonus episodes. You get exclusive access to other bonus content and just a lot of other good stuff. This week, we want to do a special shout out to a new patron, Fardos. That's Phardos. Fardos. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
It's important to enunciate that one.
We do have an announcement, a fun announcement that's really exciting. We're going to have a surprise guest for our next episode. Do we know who it is? Who is it?
No clue. I want. It's a surprise. I want to know.
Oh, right. I haven't even told them. No, you know. Karen Stewart, who is in charge of merchandising and events over at Dragonsteel Entertainment, is going to come on the show and chat with us about the incredible work she does and is going to give us a peek into how things get done over there. If y'all remember and enjoyed our previous interview with Isaac Stewart, Isaac and Kara are married and both work together at Dragonsteel to make things run amazingly well over there.
They're both very, very nice.
They're both wonderful people.
Yes.
Kara is also responsible for a lot of the giveaways we've done in the past. So we have a lot to thank her for. We will actually be recording that a week earlier than normal, so that's going to actually be on May 17th, which is a week from today. But we will publish the episode on our normal schedule a week later. So if you listen to the podcast recordings, you won't notice any change. So yeah, that's exciting.
I'm looking forward to it. This is I know this isn't technically like part of the Cosmere, but I don't know. I just think it's going to be a very interesting discussion to see a side
but it's part of the Sandersonian Institute.
Yes, I think it's going to be very interesting to see sort of behind the scenes how certain things work.
I think so too. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So should we dive into the Rithmatist?
Sure.
So for a long time, this was actually I cited this as my favorite thing that Brandon had written. And It was originally titled Scribbler, like I mentioned earlier. Brandon wrote the original draft back in 2007 and posted several chapters on his website, which led to a very excited and then a very, very sad Bill for a time. Because I read those 4 or 5 chapters and just absolutely devoured them. Like, I thought this was the best thing I had ever read in my life. And a short while after that, Brandon was doing a Q&A session at Quark, which is the club where we all met each other at BYU. And this was the same year, very shortly after Brandon had been tapped to finish The Wheel of Time. And so Brandon, of course, is taking questions at his Q&A, like you do. And I raised my hand and I said, okay, so how is this Wheel of Time stuff going to affect Scribbler? And his shoulders slumped a little bit and he looked at me and I could, like, very apologetically. And he's like, so Scribbler's probably going to have to be tabled for a while I get the Wheel of Time out. And I don't know what my face looked like, but based on Brandon's reaction to my face, it had to have been like the most heartbroken, just horrible, just sad face. Because he said, I'll tell you what. If you go to my website and you send me an email through the Contact Me page, I'll send you a draft of the book. At which point I kind of started freaking out a little bit. And so I did it. It took him a while to get back to me, probably like 2 or 3 months. Because,
busy.
Brandon's a busy guy. Mm-hmm. But I got an email and it had the draft and I just tore through it and got to the end, only then realizing that this was not a standalone book.
No.
And so I'm sitting here thinking, wait, now not only do I have to wait for the sequel, first I have to wait for this book to be published.
You have no one to talk to.
There was no one I could talk to about it.
Yeah.
It was awful. But and we're still waiting for that sequel.
Yeah. I think from what I remember, it's still going to be a bit before it can come out.
Brandon is trying to polish some stuff up and figure some stuff out. Part of it is because he was in a completely different stage of his author career when he wrote Scribbler. Because, again, this was before The Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
And The Wheel of Time kind of forged him into a different kind of author. Mm-hmm. And
what had he released right before Wheel of Time? Was that
was that Mistborn?
No, I believe it was Warbreaker.
Was it? Oh, yeah, it could have been Warbreaker.
Yeah, because it was Warbreaker, and that's the other thing. Brandon connects it to, in his opinion, one of his greatest failures. Because after he'd finished Elantris and Mistborn and Warbreaker, he said, okay, I want to go back to the beginning and tell the Dragonsteel story. I want to tell the origin of Hoyd. And so he started writing The Liar of Partinel. And there were all sorts of different things that he was trying to do because, first off, Hoyd's the character he wants to get right no matter what.
Oh, yeah.
And he was just sort of trying to figure out how to do it, how to take this really interesting side character and make them a good main character. He called it the minions problem. Like in the Despicable Me, you've got these minions that are absolutely, engaging.
Chaotic.
And then you create the Minions movie. He's like, my kids loved it, but for me, it just really fell flat because suddenly you're focusing on this fun little diversion.
Yeah, but the 2-bit, fun side thing compared to its now focus, yeah.
And so he's writing Liar of Partinel, just having trouble with it. And so he retreated to another book because that's what Brandon does. To get away from writing one book, he writes a different book.
Yeah.
And
it's very much like that scene in Shrek 2 when to get away from the monster, they run away from one Starbucks into the other Starbucks.
Exactly. And so he retreated to another book where he had just sort of been doodling and kind of started figuring out the defenses and everything in this book. And he says it came from a week of creativity, the kind that made him want to be a writer in the first place. And that made me think of Shy from The Emperor's Soul, where she has that frenzied, manic creativity. And he said that's sort of what happened here, is it just sort of came together and just worked.
Yeah.
But and that's part of it is because he wanted to work on something that didn't have to follow the same rules. Originally, it was supposed to be a Cosmere book. And
I still think it is.
And Brandon, the main reason Brandon decided not to do it is because he just didn't want Earth to be in the Cosmere.
Yeah.
Which is fair.
Even a weird version of Earth. He just didn't want it to be in the Cosmere.
I still swear there's a shard of geometry or something. There's a shard here. I swear.
A shard got off and it escaped into alternate Earth, right? There we go. There you go, Jordan.
So Brandon got through all of, he did he finished the Wheel of Time. He got the Way of Kings published as well. And then finally he got the Rithmatist published on May 14th, 2013, which when this episode airs, it will be 2 days away from 10 years ago or from 8 years ago.
Oh, wow. And
that was actually purely by accident. So that's kind of cool.
Bill, I think we were supposed to claim that we did this on purpose.
No, we're not. Okay, so one of my favorite things, Brandon said his elevator pitch to himself for this book was a muggle at Hogwarts.
And it feels like that for sure. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that he makes elevator pitches to himself. He has so many storybook ideas that he has to...
Keep straight, and I figure people probably ask him, and so then he can summarize it better that way if you have the elevator pitch version of it. So,
first of all, the setting of this book is incredible.
Yes,
it's crazy.
The other thing he said though is, it's a muggle at Hogwarts. The other thing is he kept wanting to play StarCraft. And so he wrote about it. He wanted to write about playing StarCraft. And so that's kind of what he did, is he created an RTS magic system.
Yeah.
What's RTS?
Real-time strategy.
Ah, okay, right.
Especially during the final fight where he then turns it into a tower defense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Like, this would be really cool if somebody wanted to animate this. Because I think even in the foreword or something, he says that... I think was it Ben McSweeney, did some sketches for a graphic novel of it, and I'm like, that would have been really.
This is
cool.
one that would work really well as a graphic novel. This one would work well as an animated production.
Yeah. This one, the ones I want animated, I want this one animated, and I still think Stormlight Archive probably works better as a animated.
Because it would keep production costs.
It'd need an enormous budget otherwise.
Yeah, well, I think it needs an even worse one for live action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I mean that otherwherwise.
It's like the live action would be insane.
Well, and I just worry you can't show that world correctly in film, but
there'd be so much CG.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but this one, it's just the way. I think this would also just be a very fun challenge for any artist, just to have all these creatures moving along.
Oh yeah.
Straight surfaces, I think would be something they would find to be quite engaging.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember what it is, but I could have sworn I've seen something where there is like an animated show where things go along walls like that, and I just can't place what it is, but I could have sworn I've seen that in something.
Paper Mario.
I did play that a little bit.
Actually, what was that? It was one of the DS Legend of Zelda games.
Link Between Worlds. Yeah. That actually would work as well.
I haven't played that one, but anyway, I could. It also just reminds me of.
It also reminds me of. I can't remember if it's a short story or novella. Flatland is the name of it, and it's a story about geometric shapes, and they exist in 2 dimensions, and it's really a fascinating study. But so yeah, we were talking about the setting. It really is a very cool setting.
Yeah.
So the first thing Brandon did is he shrunk the world. It's about half the size that it normally would be.
Do we get a map? We don't get a map of what Europe and Asia look like, do we?
No, we just get a map of the United Isles of America.
Yeah. That's
all
right.
60 of them.
They don't show. Oh,
but
that's crazy.
But Brandon said he essentially shrunk the size. And he's like, and the core is made of a denser material to make up for gravity.
To make gravity work.
During an interview, Ben McSweeney was saying there was a lot of hand wavium going on this one.
It's fine.
Which he's allowed to do with YA a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the Cosmere, he's got some very, very, very strict rules that you can tell, particularly from the Stormlight books, influenced where Chalklings came from. Because it sounds like they were essentially another form of Spren.
They're like a mix between awakened creatures and Spren.
Mm-hmm. That is a good comparison, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and then the wild Chalklings are different too.
Oh yeah, they're
and so those
so
are more
scarier.
like Spren, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, and the next thing he did is he turned the United States into an archipelago.
Yeah.
Ruled by a pseudo-monarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it like a constitutional monarchy kind of thing?
Constitutional theocratic monarchy, kind of? All I know is they have knight senators.
Yeah, which I'm like, what position? I mean, it's sort of.
I think Brandon just likes having the word knight followed by what would be a different noun. So you have Knights Radiant, you have Knights Senators.
Hey, it's all good. It's just a fun word, knights.
And the next thing he did, and this is just Brandon being Brandon, he has Korea take over most of Europe and create an empire.
And ruin
I'm
Italian
sure they took
food.
over.
So for our listeners who aren't aware, Brandon spent 2 years on a church mission in Korea. So he spent a lot of time over there. He's fascinated by the history. And he was like, what if we did it this way?
We should specify it's South Korea.
South Korea in particular, yes.
I did speak to one random Korean guy, and he was very bothered that I didn't say South Korea instead of, I just said Korea. So I figure that's important to make sure we get right.
And so they're referred to as the Joseon Empire. Mm-hmm. The part that really just threw me was when, in the lunchroom, when Joel is talking about how much he loved, quote, Italian food.
Yeah, no, they ruined
Italian food.
Italian
Soy
food.
sauce and uses chopsticks, and I'm just like, this is not right. There's something, this does not compute.
Well,
Yeah,
even
like
they said like
just tweaked
Germanic
it.
foods were, what
Like
was
sandwiches. It was
was
like
some-
sandwiches of some sort.
But like they had like kimchi in there with it, and it's just like, no.
Yeah, there were some like kimchi sandwiches, and I think was it Melody
kimchi's
who was glad that it was. Yeah, I think Melody's not happy about.
Kimchi is awful. I hate kimchi.
I've never had it. I need to try it at least once.
I haven't tried it, but from what I know of its making, I'm hesitant. But I'm also a wuss with spicy things, so yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the United Isles of America,
Yes.
though. I do need to. I have a
Get
bone
ready.
to pick with Brandon.
Get ready.
Jordan has heard the rant. Some of the
Buckle up.
names are really interesting. Zona Arida. That makes sense. It's because Arizona is the arid zone. It just tweaking the word placement and putting it into Zona Arida. It makes sense.
Well, to how you
Nebraska.
actually
you've
would
shortened
say
Nebraska.
it in Spanish.
Huh? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I liked Cascadia. That's like Washington and Oregon and part of California, kind of.
So there's a lot of them that are really interesting, but I will never forgive him for Georgia Bama.
I've forgotten about that.
I grew up in
Georgia-Bama.
Alabama.
There's
First off,
It's Georgie. It's like, yeah.
Alabama is a Native American name. Georgia is named after King George. In this book, there is no King George. There was a King Gregory. And so I'm just...
Maybe
I
his
will
father
not
was
forgive him
George.
for this. This is not okay. Georgia, Bama. No, Brandon. You and I need to have a conversation.
My favorite part of it is I've now heard this rant at least 4 times.
Yes, you
But-
have.
But it
And
just
you'll hear it more.
I know every single time it happened that
can see it
he
coming.
was dying a little inside, but every time I see it, I giggle just because I know how much.
Because you're a
bothers him.
monster.
What are you talking about? I
Georgia,
fully
Bama.
understand what he did with my state of Texas, and it's still
It's
Texas.
Texas.
Because
And
it
it
doesn't
looks
matter the
like
universe.
Texas.
Texas is Texas.
And it essentially looks like Texas.
Yeah, that part bothers me as far as archipelago, and I'm just like, you realize Texas is really oddly shaped, and The upper part should not. There's no rivers to follow. Like it shouldn't take that shape.
He's just
Texas Blade in chat is cheering now.
I can just see him going, yeah, I'm gonna need to keep the Texans happy. I got to keep it Texas shaped. It's fine. So
it should have at least followed some rivers, like the Red River. Okay, yeah, I see what we're doing here, but
I did find it interesting that the Utah area is called Bonneville.
Well, it's the Bonneville Lake.
Right. It makes sense. Well, Bonneville Salt Flats as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, yeah.
And so I was like, okay, that's a clever one. But Georgia, Bama.
Another thing Kokomo. There's like Kokomo, and it's by like Cincinnati and Cincinnatus and Crockett and St. Louis. So I don't know
Kokomo is actually a fictional island created by the Beach Boys.
Well, yeah, I know that. But why is it in the middle of the United Isles? That's what I'm curious about. So.
Because Brandon was having way too much fun when he was drawing this map.
So
anyway, there
was one other thing that bothered me about the world he built. He has all these really cool arithmetic academies that are sort of reference other things. You have Our Lady of the Circle Academy, which was, where was that one?
Kokomo.
Yeah, then there's Mainford. Oh, okay, because Mainford is a place. Calgarius. Oh, okay, so it's kind of like Calgary. And then Denver Academy.
Denver.
We couldn't do anything cool with
Denvarius, I don't know.
That's the Air Force. That's where the flying chalklings come from.
What?
That's Colorado Springs, but close. It's an hour away. But it was just one of those things. Just going through, I'm like, you didn't even try to do something with like the Rocky Mountains. No, it's just Denver Academy.
Or just turning it French or whatever, because there's a couple that have like the Canada ones.
Yeah, I just felt like Brandon was
you
like...
You mean Canada?
Canada, sorry.
He was having fun naming everything. He's like, crap, I need one sort of in the center here. Denver. Boop. And he just sort of gave up on that one.
And I love that he centered everything, like the dark portal into who knows where all the evil pours out of, is centered on his hometown in Nebraska.
Oh, that's right. I'd forgotten about that. Where the tower is.
And it's made it inordinately more interesting than it ever was before.
Well, I mean, the supernatural watchers, those people, they would also agree that things happen. No, it's Kansas. It's either Kansas or Nebraska. I can't remember, but
it's hard to tell the difference.
Yeah.
Either way, you can tell he's having fun, naming the Hellmouth after his home.
The other thing was kind of cool is because of the time he decided to present it in, where he gets to do sort of 1920s reporter voice on certain people. Hastings was just straight out of that era. I just loved it. He's like, capital idea, and I'm just like, good show. Hullabaloo.
And I loved the horse steam things.
The Equilix or
Equilix, yeah, they sound so cool. I wish there were more drawings of them. They're just like on the cover.
It's on the cover though.
I know, but I want to see the whole thing. You can't see the back legs or the tail. The horse lover wants the picture.
Okay, so Jordan, you were going on about some of these characters. So let's actually take a look at some of the characters from this book. So our the main character, of course, is Joel. He's our viewpoint for the entire book.
Yeah.
And he is the aforementioned Muggle at Hogwarts. He's the non-wizard student at Math Hogwarts. Before we go into Joel, actually, the other thing that I really think is interesting is if you look at like the way the religion developed in this world. And so you have all of these mathematicians who are referred to as saints.
Like Da Vinci gets to become
like
a
Saint
saint.
Da Vinci, exactly.
Yeah, Saint
Da Vinci in particular would get one because, his studies on the Vitruvian Man and, the golden circle.
Proportions golden ratio.
Golden ratio, yeah. He would definitely be considered a saint. Although wasn't he also considered a radical?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think that even when they mentioned that he's like, Joel makes some kind of internal comment about how he was not religious, but he got to be a saint anyway because of everything that he did with math.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's some really awesome world building in this. As far it's interesting because it's also we've never seen Brandon take on an alternate history. I mean, and this is it's not quite alternate history because there's a lot of other things going on, but there is a lot of alternate history feeling stuff going on here.
Yeah. And then, like, for example, if you look at the iconography in the church, where the building is cross-shaped, and it still fits with a form of Christianity, but in the center is a 9-point circle.
Because circles are a big deal.
Marked by pillars. And I'm just like, this is... Brandon came up with some really interesting concepts on this one.
Well, and they have a different form of... sort of, there was like a crisis in a lot of the old church when suddenly Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Well, in this in this world, once they found out that the orbits aren't exactly circular and the Earth isn't exactly spherical,
it freaked them out.
Yeah, there's a crisis. It's like, wait a minute. This was sort of the proof of things.
But it's all circles. It's circles.
It's now almost a circle, which is just the worst.
Well, I mean, one good line of vigor and it's going to knock the whole thing out of orbit.
And then what's going to happen?
But no, it's just it's really. Oh, and then we haven't even talked about the gearworks. Like, there's gearworks, everything. Brandon's referred to this as gear punk,
spring punk, because there's more springs than gears.
Clockwork.
Clockwork, yeah.
Because the gearworks were somehow different from the spring works, and I didn't quite understand because he used them as different things. Because they refer to these old clocks as gear-based, and the new ones are spring-based, and everything has to be wound up.
And they usually use chalklings to do it because it's so labor-intensive.
Right. Also, I found it very odd when he's given the gold coin, and there's clockwork inside.
That's
what
crazy.
is the purpose of this?
Okay, so... in this world, I have a theory with this. One, they're having to, if you want to prove that something isn't counterfeit, with this world, with everything being, you could wind it up. Suddenly, this coin has, you could probably tell whether or not it's a real coin based on how the gears turn.
Like you could time it or something?
Yeah, you could time it or something. But the other thing is, if you think about it, if it's based on their first dealings with the wild chalklings, the coin now has an inherent value because it doesn't seem like anything's based on the gold standard from what he's saying, which back in real history, that's what it was based on. All currency has to be backed by something. It's not until about the 1900s get on that we start doing pure fiat currency. These coins would have an inherent value because they somewhat repel wild chalklings.
Well, and Rithmatist was discovered because he apparently was carrying a pocket watch that followed this mechanic. And
so that's my theory of what he was going for. The whole idea of it being this, there's an inherent value to it because it can do something.
And I can see it like being a holdover is that this is how it's been done, so they continue to do it that way. And even though not everybody's going to connect it back to,
and they don't. There's definitely a lot of tradition.
Well, and also because of how difficult it would be to make coins, it also would definitely keep inflation down because no one wants to need a bunch of these coins. Their pennies definitely are not going to be as fun as ours.
Because I was wondering, because I don't remember them having clocks inside, right? I don't remember the little ones having them.
No,
from what he'd said, it was just
it was the dollar that had the
dollar,
which was
what Melody gave him.
I loved Melody being in awe of how poor he was.
I know it was so embarrassing. I was like, oh, honey, that.
Well, and it's interesting that he doesn't, but he never realizes how poor he was. Because he had what was necessary. Yeah. And they learned to make do with what little they had.
Well, and it's I've heard stories of like people in real life who grow up having servants and whatever else from these extremely wealthy families, and then they make friends or whatever, associate with people who don't have those things, and they just don't really grasp it until it's in their face.
Well, I mean, that's your childhood is your childhood. And
it's how you
everyone thinks their childhood is normal until they get out there and you find out what made your childhood weird.
And you realize how weird your family really is.
Yes.
We're all weird here.
No, it's but the thing I like, I mean, we're sort of jumping into the characters here. I liked that Melody starts off as the super melodramatic, and she's always melodramatic, but she more does it for effect at a certain point. And but we see in that moment where they go to the ice cream shop that she may be melodramatic, but she's spoiled sweet, not spoiled rotten.
Yeah, she's still
she's a good
nice
person.
Yeah.
Like, she has a good heart.
And I almost wonder if being the youngest, she's kind of like learned to play it up more just because they probably thought it was cute, or she just got away with more that way, and thankfully
or there's the only way she could get attention given her family.
Yeah, it's possible.
Like because I mean, when it's supposed to be 1 in 1,000 are Rithmatists, and
it's like all four kids
and both parents. Like the odds of that are insane. And but I think even David comments, or David, wrong young adult book. Joel comments like that they've done tests and it doesn't seem to be genetic yet.
Yeah,
there you go. Here's this family.
Speaking of the name Joel, that's also the name of one of Brandon's sons. And so that's just an interesting little tidbit.
Clear that Brandon likes the name.
Yeah.
Joel is an interesting character because he's like, honestly, Jordan, you've described yourself in a way that reminds me of Joel, because you were the kid who was obsessed with sports and sports statistics, but you weren't an athlete. Yeah.
So I've always pitched this as this is a sports story. This isn't a fantasy story. Because I relate to Joel a lot because I run like a duck, but I want her to be good at sports. And let me tell you what doesn't go well with most sports, running as a duck, except for the one time at field day where we had a race where we had to wear flippers. I left everyone in my dust.
Nice.
So I just got to invent that sport and somehow get that to take off, and I can dominate.
But, I just like that look at that sort of character, the one who is obsessed with the sport that he can't play.
It reminds me a lot of Monsters University with Mike's story.
Mike Wazowski.
In that,
that's actually a good comparison.
Well, he has that cool in that movie. He has that cool speech at the lakeside where he just goes on. It's like, I thought if I just wanted it enough, I could make it happen. And it's the strangely motivating but at the same time depressing, Aesop of, no, sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you try, you still can't do some things. And some of life is learn to do what you can with what you got.
Yes. And that's one of the things that Joel does. Like, the ending of this book, I think, is just brilliant. Like, I hadn't even thought about the whole concept of she's been tracing the whole summer.
Yeah, it didn't. I even kind of forgot. I think I remembered part of the end fight, like the big melee. And it didn't click until we were almost to it that I was like, oh, wait, she's been tracing. So that's, because I remembered that she traced his lines, but I didn't remember the connection from that before.
But it's a really cool way for their abilities to complement each other in just the right ways. I love that she stops him from drawing these little mutant lizard blobs.
Lizard men, and she's like,
she's like, just draw an X, I'll make it happen.
I'll make my pretty unicorns. And I love that he's just like, no, you're messing with my manliness. And she's like, you'll get unicorns and Pegasus and things, and you'll like it.
You're gonna like it.
Okay, I don't know. Every other TF2 player, every time it said she drew a unicorn, in my head, I saw the Balloonicorn from TF2. Look it up. I know it's not what she's drawing, but in my head, I always saw Balloonicorn.
See, I imagined like Fabio Unicorn with like the mane,
just huge curly, mane and tail. Yeah, with
purple hair and enormous eyelashes. Like the unicorn that Mabel dreams up in
Gravity Falls.
Yes. Oh, yes.
In Gravity Falls.
Yeah.
Man, we are all over the place with our references today. But
we're so all over the place. Yeah.
No, the other thing that was really cool about, as far as their dynamic, is what Joel really helps her see is that a lot of her instruction is too limiting for who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of the concept of, I'm trying to remember what book it was in. Oh, it was that chess book I was reading. I was talking to Bill about a couple days ago.
The Art of Learning?
Yes, The Art of Learning, but it's written by a guy who was the subject of finding Bobby Fischer, or searching for Bobby Fischer. Searching for Bobby Fischer. So he makes a lot of chess comparisons for obvious reasons. And he talks about how he had a teacher who he had this real instinctual attacking style, but he had a teacher who was trying to get him to appreciate the defensive side and was really trying to mold him into this guy. It's all this math and all this stuff, but he was losing his ability to improvise, and so he eventually abandoned it. And they're so busy trying to fit her into this cookie cutter mold of, this is what Arithmetist is, this is how you fight. And fair enough, because they have to, they're going to have to spend 10 years at Nebraska, and they're going to have to survive there. And so there are certain things that is part of fighting force they feel that you have to do. At the same time, because they're doing it, they're losing out on her incredible chalkling control. And it took someone...
Yes. She has weaknesses that they don't all have, but she also has strengths that nobody's ever matched before. I mean, her work with chalklings are unbelievable. And so this defense that he presents to her...
the Jordan defense.
The Jordan defense, yeah. Where it relies on just insane, overwhelming numbers of chalklings.
And just like Jordan...
But nobody else works with that because walls. They can't do chalklings that way. It's impractical for them, but for her, it's absolutely perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, she can... Like, everyone else is like, how do you write the commands? And she's just like, what commands?
They do what I want them to do. She just has this instinctual...
Like, I love that Joel was asking her about, it's like, well, how do they go get messages and bring it back? She's like, well, they just move and do things, and I understand what they mean. And I'm like, it's like bumblebees, and they talk to each other by dancing. So that's what I just pictured, was little unicorns dancing around and shaking their heads. But
secret language of the bees.
Yes. Those unicorns are actually really hard to draw. Me and my daughter did some on the chalk. With chalk outside, and
nice.
They're actually kind of, so the one that I put up on the social media is the one I did, and I'll probably put up my daughter's if she wants me to later. But yeah, it's they're getting that mane just so is really hard, and I'm like, I can't imagine doing that many of them. Granted, the chalk I was using is one of those really big ones that's really hard to get a lot of detail, but
no, Joel and Melody are a really interesting,
they're fun.
Dynamic. It's the kind of dynamic that could be done very, very poorly, but I think Brandon actually did a good job of balancing it. Melody has potential to be an incredibly annoying character.
Oh yes.
But I didn't find her annoying in this.
Normally that character drives me insane, but I loved Melody in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She and Joel play off each other.
They learn from each other's growth, like from their strengths and weaknesses, and like she'll sit there and make it sigh and moan about things and be like, oh, well, like, I'm always getting left out. And then Joel realizes, oh wait, I'm getting left out of stuff the same exact way. And so they both can understand their different struggles and challenges and things, and figure out how to help each other.
They each have the life that the other thinks they want. And neither of them really understand. It's like, why don't you appreciate this life that you have? And because they each want the other's life, they learn to appreciate what they have in their own lives.
Yeah.
No,
it's good character growth.
Brandon said that he...
I was going to say the thing I loved was they step on each other's toes so many times in this book, and they actually apologize to one another for and like it's real apologies.
Yes. Well, like Melody, you know, the whole, then I suppose I'll have to forgive you. You know, and it's just like, it's in character, it's affectionate. Brandon he's multiple times, he said Melody kind of came from the fact that a lot of times when he's writing a strong female character, what he did was accidentally just end up taking away any semblance of femininity. You know, with Vin, you know, she lived on the streets and she hid every aspect about her that made her seem like a girl out of sheer defense from the situation that she grew up in. Yeah. Melody, he was like, I want to create a strong female character that's still girly.
Yeah, the ice cream shop scene was fun, that she kind of played stuff up for, and we want this. And,
it was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when Joel was all like, but why I feel weird if you pay. And she's like, well, here, fine, you do it then. Here's the money,
and
you do it.
And he's paying, and he's here.
Okay. Yep.
But yeah, I really liked their dynamic. I also liked that they were consistent. Like there was growth, but the characters were still consistent.
Yeah.
You know, like Melody, she learned stuff, but she kept trying to stick her nose in. Even as she learned things, she still had this drive. She's like, I want to be a part of these things.
I want to know. Yeah.
And she learned and adapted the ways that she became parts of things, but she still didn't lose that bit of her character.
Well, and unlike a lot of, you know, characters that she's actively trying to find this stuff out. She's not just sitting back and waiting for it to be handed to her, which would be easily could have been what they do, given her background, you know, making her this rich girl who's used to getting what she wants.
Right.
But instead she was being active. Now she was being active in a way that was counterproductive, but you know, how old are they supposed to be? 14,
they're
15?
like
16, I believe.
Yeah, I think they're 16 because he said that he would have a year before he'd have to go if he.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Okay, so but yeah, 16, and so it's perfectly understandable that they would have these ideas and completely screw it up.
Yeah.
That said, one of my favorite
know just
things,
enough to get in trouble.
One of my favorite things is when Joel has the idea of he's going to break into the professor's name. I'm forgetting it all of a sudden.
Nalazar or
Snape.
Or Fitch?
Yeah, Nalazar.
Nalazar.
Yes. Anyway, Severus Snape. And then he stops and he's like, I'm going to need to plan a lot more before I try something like this. And it's just like, wow, this is the first time it's ever happened in any young adult history. You had a bad idea, then you stopped.
And you thought about it before you did it.
Speaking of Nalazar, remember, as a reminder for those who listened to our Isaac Stewart interview, Nalazar is the origin of Naj from the Cosmere. So Chris's traveling companion Naj, because Isaac kept trying to say Nalazar's name and calling him Nazraloff.
And
so Brandon finally was like, well, who is Nazraloff? Tell us about it.
Nice. I'd forgotten that.
Okay, so Fitch. Fitch is our kind of not Dumbledore, but Dumbledore.
Dumbledore.
Yeah,
like, he's not the headmaster, but he's this amazing professor who knows everything there is to know.
I keep thinking there's another Hogwarts professor that like fits him better, and I can't remember who it would be. But anyway, continue.
Shy McGonagall.
Oh, but McGonagall's much more confident.
I said Shy McGonagall.
Oh, okay. Shy McGonagall as in the adjective. Okay, there we go. Yes. But it was really fun to see the growth and the confidence that he had, like after his first duel where he gets knocked out, and this is, spoilers for the book. And then when he faces off at the end where he's like, no, you're messing with my students. So
and then suddenly it's just like,
boom.
He's a baddie.
Yeah, he kicks butt.
When he just the image of him kneeling down with chalk in both hands and spinning in a circle. It's just one of those, it's about to go down.
Chalk akimbo.
Yes.
Now, one thing that was interesting, one of the tweaks between the version of the book, the draft of the book that I read and the one that came out, because he edited it and updated it and all sorts of stuff, was the duel at the very beginning of the book between Fitch and Nalazar was originally on a chalkboard. So it was originally up on a wall, and the students were watching it because the students had a better angle on it that way. Mm-hmm. And so the chalklings were moving along this vertical surface. It was, and he ended up changing that to the ground.
The floor, yeah. Anywhere. And just having them angled, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting change. So Professor Layton, not that Professor Layton.
It's look, it's clearly the Professor Layton from the video games has snuck in here. They both wear top hats, different. I'm sure.
So there was one change that I noticed and I was disappointed in. I understand why he made the change, but I also got the character a little bit better. So in the book, the word that he's obsessed with about everything is incredible. In the original draft, the word was sexy. Ooh. And so he would talk about, isn't that a sexy diagram? Or, and like, I remember teachers like that who were trying to, be cool and, sort of be a little bit edgy. And that's who Professor Layton was. And so when they changed it to incredible, I'm like, he lost something there.
Yeah, but I think he's making sure it's not going to be too...
it also would feel very anachronistic for that era.
Yes, and I'm fairly certain that's why he took it out. But I'm just like... when I read, isn't that a sexy equation or whatever it was, I was just like, I know exactly who this guy is.
This was the part of the book I related so much to Joel being frustrated at having to show his work in math. Because for me, math made sense, and apparently not to the level of Joel. Joel is clearly got
math is math. Math is math.
Yeah. And so the teacher being like, no, you're not even showing your work. I got in trouble in some of my earlier classes because I wouldn't show my work. And I'm just like, you're making me waste time.
Yeah, I turned in a standardized test, and my teacher gave me raised her eyebrow, and she's like, no, you need to take that back and really try. I was like, I did. I finished the test. And she just gave me this look, like this scowl. Like, how dare you disrespect education? I came back, I was in the 99th percentile on the test. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, that was not my experience with math. I am much more of a words person than a math person. So I was watching, reading the scenes where he's just like blazing through the math, and I'm like, man, that would have been nice to be able to do. But, oh well.
I loved, yeah. I love, though, that not only that, he actually corrected him on the angles. And that's where it's just like, okay, he's not just good at math. This is a prodigy. Because it's just like, you were like 3 degrees off.
He's like, you need to have it this much longer or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
I had a math teacher who she purposely drew her pictures wrong. The way that, it's a short, fat cylinder. She'd purposely put the opposite dimensions just because there were certain kids that it would drive up the wall. And she just seemed to enjoy that part of her job.
Mm.
But
sometimes these kids need to be put in their places.
Look, they don't get paid that much, so they got to extract value some other way.
Yeah.
Torturing children.
We talked about Inspector Harding a little bit. You said that he is. How are you describing him?
He's like the 1920s reporter guy. Just the whole capital idea. And
yeah, I picture him a little bit as Grandpa Moneybags from the Monopoly guy.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'd always forgot that there's two bad guys. That's what always got me, is I'm sitting there going, well, I know there's one. I know there's at least one, and it's not who I'm going to expect it to be. And then as soon as it came out as Harding, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And then it was Nal, and I'm like, I always forget there's two. There's two of them. And it still got me. This is like my second time reading it, and I still forgot.
The thing I forgot the entire scene inside the Chamber of Secrets or whatever it is inside the church. Like, I forgot the
little like thing on the wall.
The Shadow Blaze.
I completely forgot about that scene. Like, it showed up and I'm like, why don't I remember this? This was a big deal.
The second time I read the book, I had the same response. I remembered it this time because I forgot it that time.
I remembered it, but I couldn't remember exactly what was up with it. I just remembered there was something in there that walked on the walls, and it ran away from him, and he was so disappointed.
It wasn't on the wall. It was like
yeah,
It
hovering.
was
and then it got lost under the altar, and I was just like, no, it's like when you drop a coin down a grate, and you're like, no, I want to get that.
Yeah, that was trippy.
I don't know. For me, the Shadow Blaze fell a little flat. I'm proud of myself. Your crickets do nothing to stop me.
Okay, so you were talking about bad guys, Amy. Mm-hmm. I loved the double reverse with Nalazar.
Oh my goodness,
that was so good.
That was trippy. I was like, oh, Joel's just shot himself in the foot, and there's the only person he can actually probably tell is Melody.
Uh-huh.
And even then, what are they both of them gonna do compared to the whole establishment? And he saved the children, and he's such a good guy. And it's like, no, he's not.
You could probably tell Fitch too, I think.
Yeah, but I see Fitch still being hesitant to because he'd been so quick to say, well, it's Nalazar,
but Joel has definitive enough proof, like to the point where Fitch would trust his word if he said, he admitted as much to me.
And I mean, all you have to do to test it is put a little acid on him and then make him try and draw some chocolate.
Except we've already put a little acid on him and it didn't do anything.
Well, it knocked him out.
It did. It weakened him, remember? That's how Joel figured out
that there was
who
that.
he was, because he said, I would have been strong enough to do.
Yeah, and it was like, click. Yeah.
He might be able to get York as well. Which, by the way, let's break another trope. Let's make the authority figures reasonable.
Yes.
What? Yeah.
I mean, even Harding was reasonable as well, because, during the day, he was very nice. Harding.
Mm-hmm. I liked him when he was normal. I liked him a lot.
No, he was a good character. But just, I feel like the twist at the end being the villain was who you thought it was all along.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So wait. Was Nalazar ever, like, when we see him, is he ever himself in the day or no? No, because they said Nalazar's dead. Okay, that's right. I thought so.
The thing I really like is once he understands what he is, not that he's not, because when he's just a tool, he's just a tool. But once he realizes his real nature, and then he's like, wait, these kids will go to the front lines. And all they know are offensive abilities in a completely defensive area. Mm-hmm. And
where they're going to get.
And suddenly he's just putting it all together. And it's just, it's the red lines going all over the wall. He's just like
red strings.
This is, I almost wonder if, in the second book, if it's going to have to be that Joel and Melody are going to have to do like Dumbledore's army. With like, no, we're going to hammer in defenses into you guys, all these students, because otherwise you're going to get annihilated.
Well,
on the
apparently
front lines.
the next book, a lot of it takes place in South America.
Oh, really?
It's going to be called the Azatlanian. And
oh, that's right. I'd forgotten that. So we don't even know what's going on down there.
Right.
We know there's an Aztec Empire, and we know that they saw the United Isles, and they're just like, yeah, that's like Ravenholm. We don't go there anymore.
We don't go there, no.
But yeah. And then Joel's mother, and father.
That poor, oh man.
Joel's father, the most important character who never appears on screen. Mm-hmm. Again, they've done a good job of fleshing him out without actually showing him. You get who he was.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably more to him than we've seen, and I suspect we'll get some flashbacks and figure out some stuff that went on previously in the next book as well.
Because the biggest question is, how did he figure out this new line?
Well, not only that, if there's lines that they haven't discovered, what other lines are there? Because this is a line that affects the real world.
Yeah.
2 of them.
You know,
We've got 2 extra ones in this one.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
Of revocation, the line of silencing.
Okay, but just before we go into that, it annoyed me that none of them figured out that it made things quiet. It's just the entire time. It's like, no one heard it. Clearly it makes things quiet.
Like, I'd forgotten that too, but I mean, you think about it, none of the other lines that they've seen affect the real world quite the same way. I mean, the line of forbiddance, like, builds a wall, but it doesn't, you don't hear them make sound. They don't have anything to do with sound or with people other than being a physical force. But
they've been operating under the assumption for so long that this is the hard limit. There are these 4 lines.
Except they knew it was arithmetic. They tested that.
They didn't know it was arithmetic until significantly later in the book, though.
Until they went into that 3rd crime scene, and then
but by the 3rd one, I feel like they should have figured it out.
And then Joel said, "Make a chalkling and set it to attack this."
And it stopped. Yeah.
And that it bugged me because I'm just like, guys, you know where they put it. Like, everyone should figure. Oh, this somehow makes things quiet. This is somehow used to conceal what's going on because no one else heard except these people where it wasn't drawn. It drove me insane just because it felt obvious. But I put that away because there's too many other good plot twists in this book. But this one bugged me.
The way it worked also did kind of make the sound editor in me happy because it's essentially like a super compressor.
It's a high pass filter.
And so, but like, because with a compressor, once you cross a certain threshold, it dampens everything. And with this, it's like there is a threshold before it actually activates. And then the louder you are, the softer it makes. And so it's a really cool
Well, it makes
concept.
sense the further away you go because sound waves get weaker on a squared relationship since it's a pressure wave. And so it makes perfect sense that it is intent, like there's a certain threshold for it.
Okay, can we talk about the just body horror of Inspector Harding when he finally goes full Forgotten, and he opens his mouth up
and they just
wide,
pour out,
and he tips his head back and the little chocolate. It's absolutely horrifying. There's so many people I've talked to who've said this is one of the first books that creeped me out.
Like what creeped me out too was when Joel was reading about the stories about the wild chalklings attacking and basically kind of eating the settlers. Like that was kind of freaky for me too. But what is it in Supernatural? I keep going back to this show. There's demons will possess people, and kind of what happens with Professor Harding when they all pour out of his mouth is sort of like how they show demons getting out of people when they're possessed. Is they just this black smoke kind of comes out that way. So that's
interesting.
When it sounds like his mouth is opening up like a Pez dispenser.
Oh yeah. I mean, it looks kind of freaky in the show, but I think you see enough. I'd seen it enough in that it didn't weird me out as much because I was like, oh, well, it's just like that. And apparently I'm numb to that. It's still freaky, but I
hate getting squished. And the concept of being turned into a 2-dimensional scribble just sounds not fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And spasming, and it's just stop it.
And you have to
I don't sleep tonight.
It doesn't look like they remember anything either. Because when Melody got her brother back, he didn't register the passage of time.
Yeah.
So
creepy.
Another thing that was interesting that Brandon brought in was the Mary Rollinson account, which is actually based on a real world, but very embellished and not accurate account by a woman named Mary Rollinson who was kidnapped by Native Americans. Brandon feels a little bit off about this now because he's like, I may have been a little bit insensitive in it, but the fact that he brought it in was fascinating.
Yeah.
Just sort of because I remember studying that in an American literature class. And just sort of a way to look into an inaccurate account and how it can color public perception of a thing. Because I think that we're going to learn a lot more about wild chalklings. I think, because I think, shadow blazes, I think, are their own kind of chalkling. And so I think it's just, there's more to wild chalklings than just these scary things that are pouring out of the tower and attacking.
Yeah, I feel like they probably have their own factions and whatever else is going on, just kind of like how the Spren have their own everything that's going on.
So it'll be interesting to see how that expands out in the next book. But it was just sort of one of those things. I was like, I recognized that title.
I didn't. That's good.
You're not you weren't a lit student, so
no, okay. I was not.
That's not what I'd expect a whole lot of people to know about.
No,
the
that's
fact that Brandon incorporated it was interesting. But like it, the actual book in our world version of that book, she was just making all sorts of stuff up about how they behaved, and it led to a lot of people thinking, oh, it really added to the whole savages view.
Yeah.
And so,
this book made me feel like, it reminded me how bad I am at strategy games. Because I'm like, my husband loves playing them and you guys like doing them too, but I am terrible at these games. And I always play
on easy or like the second easiest version, just because I play them for the story.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fun way to control to get to the story, but I'm not playing to say, hey, I'm awesome at this game. But let's talk about Rithmatics and just the way the magic system works, because this was really, really, really cool.
Yes.
And I loved that he had all the diagrams as you go through the book. If you've only listened to the audiobook, it's really worth checking out the diagrams that are
it makes it a lot better because then you can visualize. And I did my poorly rendition, so on the social media I drew like 6 of them, and so you can get a sort of idea. But my circles are my circles are probably not as good as Melody's circles, so if that says anything for you. But yeah.
But it just it made the math nerd in me really, really happy.
So the reason I really like the game they make of it, where it's like, okay, if your circle breaks, you lose, you're out.
Yeah.
But that's how a lot of like the old medieval games were built. It's a war game. It's based on a simulation of war. And for this group, where if they break your circle, you're dead, that makes sense that that's the win condition in this game. And it makes sense that why does it keep getting so complicated? Like, why is what was the ultimate one?
Was it like the Advanced Easton or the Taylor? The Taylor,
yes. The Taylor defense, where you have to draw 2 circles, but the 2 circles have to both be perfectly sized, because otherwise you don't get the bind points correct. Because these lines have to go through both. And you just start going through all these interesting things. And like when you look at the Jordan defense, it's me. But when like listening to it, I imagine something different than what I see. But once I see it, like, okay, that makes more sense than what I was thinking. And then you throw on top of it, it's, they have like the formulas that explain, it's like, okay, a line of forbiddance goes as high as it's thick, it's as strong as it's straight, and they have all these formula for it. And you think about making a straight line with our arms that naturally want to make circles the more they move. And you're like, okay, that's difficult. And then you see Nalazar, who's got chalk shoes, and it's just like, what? Like, I just imagined like a tap dancer could be amazing with this. But then on top of it, you have Hastings with chalk at the end of a rifle, which sounds so random, but in this universe sounds incredibly metal. And he's sitting here at a full length. Like, how hard that would be to keep a straight line with that. And you just start going through all these different ways they're trying to come up with it. And you're just dang, this is cool.
Yeah, and with Nalazar and Harding, it is they're unnaturally good at it because of their nature as chalklings or creatures of the chalkling
thing. Yeah,
ilk.
Chalk eaters.
But again, every time I see this, I'm just like, they're playing StarCraft. They're playing StarCraft. This is an RTS. The first time I read it, I was like, Brandon has written an RTS in the 1920s or 1910s, the turn of the century.
It's in their base, bombing their dudes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the concept of, the 4 different types of lines. The lines of forbiddance, which actually affect the real world and can be used to create a box.
And can stop bullets.
That was
but they're
pretty
weak
cool.
at the corners.
Because you have to get them just exactly straight.
Mm-hmm. Lines of warding, which are your circles, which don't really affect the real world, but it's sort of
But they affect chalk things.
And you can bind different things to it, so you have a circle, but it's based on different points. The 9-point circle being based on a triangle drawn outside of the
that was
the
trippy.
circle. And then the lines of vigor. Lines of vigor are cool. It's just like, ooh, fireball, or lightning bolt.
Yeah,
you just zap them.
Just a couple
and
of
you
wavy
can
lines.
reflect them and stuff like that. Like, I feel like that's what I would be all about. Is just like, I'm bouncing these, going for all these trick shots.
If you played pool, you would do well.
And then the lines of making, which are the chalklings. And it's just like, make your dudes, create all of your dudes.
I thought it was fun how, like, the more detailed they were, the stronger they were, and like, and especially with Melody, like, I think there's something with her, because she can talk to them more than a lot of other people can and just command them, but like, she just knew their personalities or imbued them with them or something, and so she could just give them that essence, versus other people are like, well, it's got sharp pointy things, and so it goes and chews on stuff.
Well, it's
felt
very
more like that.
It's very similar to his concepts of awakening, where the more human like the object is, the less breath it takes. This is sort of the reverse, where the more lifelike it is, the more effective it is. And so it's not about economy, it's about effectiveness. But the thing I liked about it is, one, this is still a speed sport, You could draw the most detailed knight in the world, as we see at the beginning, but if you can't get it out there before the dragons come, it's a problem. And so it's
aggro decks.
Yeah, aggro decks, man. But the thing that's interesting, he talks about, like, by adding a few lines, and one of the drawings is really good in the book, where it like shows a simple spider versus a more detailed one. And if you actually look at it, there's not a ton more lines added to the detailed one, but they're just drawn in just the right way, that give it a lot of flavor to the image that wasn't there before. And it reminds me a lot of like, sort of how current, like, pictures on currency are, where they get a lot of detail by just having the line angle a certain way. If you ever look, like, really close at, like, a dollar bill, you're going to see some details in there that you're just like, whoa, they did that with, such few lines.
Just a little angle there or whatever else. Yeah. I think Joel and Melody had a conversation about, like, how pretty they are. Like, because, she was talking about her unicorns and, like, she makes them pretty and stuff. And he's like, well, it shouldn't matter. And it's like, well, it still does. And I don't know if it's just a Melody thing or if it's more just the chalklings having some kind of internal thought process or whatever, and feeling like the essence of, I am more aesthetically pleasing, so I'm stronger. Or whatever.
Well, I like Joel. He does try to analyze that. Is it because you're doing better at hitting what you imagine it as? But no, that would benefit people who have limited imagination, and it's very much the cognitive realm idea of, it has an idea of what it wants to be.
So I'm seeing more and more connections, like, as we discuss it, more connections to how it would have fit into the Cosmere a little bit more with some of the rules and stuff.
Well, and the other thing is also, Melody has practiced this probably far more than even most of the professors have at that university.
She doodles it. Yeah, she doodles all the time.
The same way that Joel has practiced the other basics.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he's studied the theory. Because the thing is, it'd be very easy for a student who's in arithmetics every single day to start tuning out the professors on the lecture, whereas Joel devours the theory part of it.
He's so desperate for it.
Yeah, and that's not the interesting part for Rithmatist, because Rithmatist can actually, do it.
Yeah, it's just like, just do it.
Yeah. Brandon has talked about how he likes to marry the science and the art, or the math and the art aspects of different things together, and this is kind of the perfect example of that.
Yeah.
All right, well, it looks like it's time to start wrapping up. So we do love hearing from our listeners, so keep on sending in questions. You can ask us about the Cosmere. You can drop us your ideas for topics you'd like us to discuss during the show. And while you're at it, we would love to hear your feedback about how you think we're doing, as well as any interesting theories you might have about what's going on in the Cosmere. Please send all questions and suggestions in a brief, concise email to cosmerestudies@gmail.com, and hopefully we'll read that as a part of the show. Honestly, we love hearing from y'all, so please send us your questions, send us your comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd prefer to send a physical letter, we do have a P.O. Box at the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, P.O. Box 970063, Orem, Utah 84097. Now, outside of the podcast, we do each have our own personal projects. Why don't we start with Jordan this time? What do you got going on, and where can we find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/splicestreams, the best place to follow me. We're finally wrapping up the Pro Amoeba League. Had the 800th Splice Stream episode where we 100%ed Banjo-Kazooie, and I was so bad at beating Gruntilda at the end. I am so rusty. It was shameful indeed, but we beat it and we 100%ed it, and that was awesome. But yeah, that's the best place you can find me.
Cool. Amy, how about you?
So my Facebook is Coincidence Cosplay and Props. My Twitter is @CoincidenceCosp because my name is too long. My Instagram is @coincidence_cosplay, and I have an Etsy shop as well as a website. My Etsy is etsy.com/shop/coincidence cosplay, and my website is www.coincidencecosplay.com. I don't know, that's probably copyrighted sound, but it's fun. So I got the chance to go to FanX's press conference because I gave a ride to one of the Hall of Famers, so that was cool.
Nice. So
I got to try out like a Twi'lek Leku, which is like the little noodle things that like the green dancing lady in front of
the hair
Jabba the Hutt. Yeah, the hair tendrils. They're called Leku. I don't know. Anyway, but I did my own take on like a smuggler type thing, and so I got to do that, and so I was on the news, and it was kind of cool.
Nice.
So they did a little bit on it, and I was in the background, and they panned the camera past us.
Cool.
So that was fun, but I'm gonna try and finish up my D&D rogue, and then I'm gonna try and actually buckle down and work on my armor from the Mandalorian, because I want to get it done. It'll be fun. So I'm gonna be doing some 3D printed knives first to finish off my D&D rogue. So that's what I'm doing.
Awesome.
Yes.
And I have another podcast with my buddy Dylan. We talk about board games. It's targeted mainly as sort of to bridge the gap between, gaming rookies and gaming veterans. Just sort of to help them come together, and also, if you want to know more about games, this is a good place to start. Help you dive a little bit deeper into the hobby. It's called The Innkeeper's Table. We come out with new episodes on Friday mornings. Our most recent episode was part of a series. It's called, where we say, I enjoyed this game. What should I play next? And this time it was, I enjoyed Catan. What should I play next? So we started diving into what other games somebody who is played the gateway game Catan or Settlers of Catan, what they might enjoy and how they might dive a little deeper into the hobby. And the next episode, we actually from time to time, we look at specific game mechanics. The next one is called Action Selection. I know that sounds like just what any game is selecting what I want to do. This is a specific kind of mechanic, and we go into sort of that explanation in the episode. So
yeah, I was going to say that almost sounds like a bad translation from a 1990s like turn-based game. Action selection.
I do have some board game reviews over at www.innkeeperstable.com, as well as social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at @InnkeepersTable. For our listeners who want to support the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, but you can't become patrons, we would love it if you'd let your friends know about the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, to like and subscribe at youtube.com/Cosmere Studies. And we would love it if you'd toss us a good review wherever you listen to us. We would appreciate that as well. So before we go, guys, any final thoughts on the Rithmatist?
It's really fun, and I want one of those horses. But anyway, and I also forgot to mention my husband's website, deckplan.io, if you like Magic the Gathering and card deck things. So yes,
cool.
Yes, that. But horses that are run on Steam and
horses.
It's fun.
Jordan, how about you? Any final thoughts on the Rithmatist?
It's a great book, but as a physicist, the whole idea of trying to base your technology on just really corked up springs really bugs me. Because let me tell you, if it's sort of like Pacific Rim. If that's the solution you've arrived at, you probably skipped a few steps to get to the wrong solution, just because you thought it sounded cool.
But Jordan, Arithmetist did it.
Yes, it did. It did do that. But the thing that can wind up a spring could easily turn a turbine, and it bugs me. But I have to let these things go. It's not
My
like
final
life.
thought is I want a sequel. I want a sequel. I
mean,
want a sequel.
It ends with to be continued. That just,
I know so many people who've talked about how long they've waited for a sequel to the Rithmatist, and I'm like, first, I had to wait 4 years for the Rithmatist to come out at all. So, don't talk to me about...
I was there.
And so I was so excited that it was finally, when the Rithmatist finally came out, I was like, oh, good. I finally am going to get my sequel. Nope. Still waiting. And it sounds like I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer. So,
well, it sounds like the person who's going to make this happen is Brandon's own children. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because his kids want a sequel too.
I don't know how, just think really like, incisive thoughts about the Rithmatist in the general direction over there, and maybe the kids will turn out to be mediums and pick up on it and just
think Sandersonian thoughts.
Yeah.
Yes.
In addition to the live episodes of the show that stream on twitch.tv/InnkeepersTable every 2 weeks, Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, listeners can find our videos on YouTube or audio versions of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much any other service you can think of that carries podcasts by searching for Cosmere Studies. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under the profile at Cosmere Studies. I can pronounce things. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for the show, email them to cosmerestudies@gmail.com. As we mentioned earlier, for our next episode, we'll have Kara Stewart, who is in charge of merchandising and events over at Dragonsteel, on for an interview to tell us about some of the hard work that goes into getting all that amazing swag into our greedy little hands. She's also, like we said, responsible for a huge chunk of the giveaways that we've had on the show. So make sure to be here for the live recording in just 1 week on May 17th, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10:30 p.m. Eastern at www.twitch.tv/InnkeepersTable. Until then, on behalf of Amy, Jordan, and myself, thanks for listening, and remember,
there's always
another
another
secret.